Part 3. The purpose of this video is to briefly address two other aspects of materialism, nominalism and monism. Now, as already noted, not all materialists are nominalists, but as the previous video illustrated, materialists have a good reason for being nominalists. Nominalism is a claim that there are no universal essences or forms in reality. I already have a detailed three-part video on this issue, and I'm not going to rehash all of that right here. But the basic problem is this. Everything in physical reality is particular inasmuch as it is material. That is to say, every material thing is distinct from every other material thing. Otherwise, it would be the same thing. An extreme nominalist might say, there really is no such thing as a chair, because all chairs are different from each other, so the name chair cannot strictly be predicated to all the beings we call chairs. The conceptualist nominalist might say, the word chair is a concept that exists in our minds that helps us to categorize all the things that we call chairs. The concept is real inasmuch as it is a concept, but in reality there is no such thing as chairness. Now, the first statement by the extreme nominalist is obviously self-contradictory, since if there was nothing by virtue of which chairs are chairs, how could the nominalist say all chairs are different from each other? You cannot call them all chairs unless there is something in the nature of the thing itself which is chairish in the first place. The second statement seems like an improvement, but it really isn't. For the concept of chair is just like the word chair. In order for it to be useful, it must correspond to something in the nature of the group itself. Moreover, if the concept in my mind is not identical to the concept in your mind, then it is incommunicable between minds. We might disagree about what the proper definition of chair ought to be, but if we do come to a definition that we can agree on about what is essential in being a chair, that definition will be the same. But how can it be the same if everything in the material world is different, including concepts in minds? The only way to escape this is to claim that the concepts themselves are immaterial, but then this concedes the very point at issue, for an essence or form is an immaterial concept or definition which inheres in something, so that Fido and Lassie may differ in every material detail, but they both match an essential definition of dogness. For more on this, see my videos on universals. Now, materialist monism, if you remember, was the idea that the basic unifying substance of existence, the one thing at the bottom of every other thing, and which constitutes the unity of existence, is matter. As I argued in the first video, this can't really be the case. Matter is always potentially something else, and demonstrates by its behavior that it is radically contingent, indeterminate, and ephemeral. On the contrary, what makes matter actual to the limited degree that it is actual is its essential form, or identity. But this identity or form is not some stuff which is in the matter, but a capacity or telos toward which matter is directed. Of course, substances are, in a certain sense, singular and indivisible. I am not saying that form and matter form a composite in the same sense of being mixed together like water and flour, but rather that form and matter are two aspects of any material substance which can be discovered by abstraction and understood, if only to a limited degree. The substantial form itself is a single thing, a unity or identity, but its materiality is transient and potential. The essence of a thing, though, is something very much like an idea which gives shape to that thing. As shocking as that may sound to a materialist, let us see what happens when we try to see it his way. Let's follow him down the rabbit hole of physicalist reductionism. We start with a rose. To the Thomistic realist, the rose is a rose. It is a subject with a particular nature which persists through change. Once it was a sapling, now it is full grown. But at every stage it was this rose, not a succession of different identities. In the course of its life it's gone through various kinds of change, modalities of its being which inhere in it as part of its nature. So at one point it was only an inch tall, then later 3 inches. First it had only green leaves, but now it has red petals, thorns, and a beautiful aroma. Its color, smell, size, the number of petals and leaves have all undergone change throughout its existence, but these changes are in its accidental forms, not its essential nature. It is rather because it has an essential nature that these accidents inhere in it. Were someone to paint its petals blue, then as long as it survived the operation it would still essentially be a rose. But if that paint caused the rose to die, then it would cease to be a rose. The change in color was only an accidental change, a change in the modality of its being, which is potentially this and potentially that within a certain limited range. But the change from a living rose to a dead rose is a substantial change, the loss of its essence altogether. Now along comes the materialist. He wants to explain the rose to the unscientific Thomist. The rose can be broken down into parts, its leaves, petals, thorns, stigma, roots, etc. On second thought, those parts can be further broken down into their particular cell types. Actually, what we should really do is break those cell types down into their respective atoms. You know what? We still haven't gotten any closer to the essence of a rose. Let's break down the atoms down to leptons and quarks. Crap, still no rose. Let's see what happens when we group those quarks and leptons according to type. Now do we have a rose? Of course not. Suppose we compare the singular reality that is a rose to an itemized list of all the parts, which when put in a certain relationship to each other make it up. If the rose is A and its parts are B, is A identical to B? No, it isn't, for a rose isn't just an aggregate of parts, but a relationship which constitutes a single identity. That single identity is not stuff, it is the way that the stuff is. The way the stuff is acting. Remember video 1, the way that it is in act. But even the stuff is not just stuff, for atoms have a nature, as do leptons and quarks. But do any one of these quarks have to exist? Is any one quark ontologically necessary? Is the world inconceivable without quark number 375,876,989? Of course not. But a rose is inconceivable as a rose without its essential nature, its formal cause. Now we're often told that the medieval scholastics, because of their interest in metaphysical questions like that above, slowed down the progress of science, that it was mechanistic reductionism that freed science up to do its work. Now this is at best only minimally true. Certainly there were plenty of scholastics who were in love with physical science such as it existed, and who made advances in optics, astronomy, physics, geology, and metallurgy long before the Newtonian revolution. Indeed, they laid the groundwork for it. But even if it were true that considerations of this sort slowed science down, that the intellectual environment fostered by Catholic scholasticism imposed an obligation on men of science to try and understand the meaning of things, not just their mechanism, I would not mind in the least. I doubt very much that monks schooled in scholasticism would have invented the atom bomb, germ warfare, or Terminator seed. Science, although born in the cradle of Catholic civilization, has long since gone off the hinges and forgotten where it came from. The rational framework which produced science had to slay skepticism first. In contrast, by junking the notion of formal and final causality of telos in nature, including human nature, science has generated a radical skepticism which, long before Darwin, has been an intellectual acid eating through the realistic framework of Western thought. Now skepticism of the most destructive and base kind is widespread and threatens to undermine the very foundations of science itself. The reductionist materialist is an enigma wrapped in a mystery lodged inside a crackerjack box. On the one hand, a prototypical scientific materialist like Michael Shermer will express shock and frustration at the widespread skepticism of reason that he finds around him, and the increase of mystery cults, paranormal activity seekers, crystal healers, and other such superstitions. On the other hand, he pushes an aggressive scientific materialism which cannot help but undermine reason, inasmuch as it is bound to suggest that everything can be submitted to doubt, deconstruction, and testing. Of course, it goes without saying that the statement, "we cannot believe in anything that cannot be scientifically verified," cannot itself be scientifically verified, which just goes to show that reason is a much bigger thing than the limited methods of the physical sciences, however useful and interesting they can sometimes be. This concludes my presentation on the limits of materialism. This series will continue with an exposition on the many fallacies of David Hume.